Welcome back to Cloudy with a Chance of Insights, the fortnightly podcast all about the Microsoft Cloud. I'm Richard Hogan, joined as always by Cyrus and David. David is going to kick us off this week with a pair of things out of Microsoft research. The first is Vega, which is a way of proving something about your identity, say your age, without actually handing over the proper documentation, which matters more and more as agents start acting on our behalf. The second is MagenticLite, which is Microsoft's attempt at running capable AI agents on small models locally on your own machine, which I know that, David, you've been playing around with this sort of thing. So I've got 3 topics this week. Another one I'm not sure I'm pronouncing right, which is Akrites, which landed yesterday, courtesy of Mark Rasanovic. And a quick follow-up on the Fable shutdown, which due to timing, we completely missed on the last pod recording. And finally, Frontier Transformation Engineer Badge, which is possibly more interesting than it sounds, particularly if you're focusing on certs this year, as I am. And then finally, Cyrus will take us home with his usual run through Intune, Entra, Defender, and Purview, as well as a look at a public Defender 0-day called RoguePlanet that is still waiting for a patch. So without any further ado, let me pass across to David.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Morning, everyone. Well, it is morning, but good afternoon or good evening, I guess, depending on when you're listening to this. So, yes, I'm back to my favourite source ever, Microsoft Research. I feel like I was neglecting them over the last few pods, so went digging and found a couple of interesting things. And they're just fairly cool, so I'm not going to go any deep sort of introspective or find the hidden meaning here conversations. None of that today. Very, very straightforward. And as you said, Richard, the first one is you're right, is it Vega? Must be Vega, mustn't it? But anyway, and this is something that I thought was super interesting. And even my wife, I mentioned it to my wife this morning. We don't often talk about the pod a lot, actually, but we were sat outside in the cool air, in the heat wave that we have here in the UK, supping a tea and a coffee, respectively. And she thought, actually, she saw a lot of value in this. So I'm glad I picked it. And I guess, the basic problem is, it's fairly straightforward, isn't it? So a lot of digital identity flows ask for, dare I say, much more information than they actually need. So, if a service wants to know, whether I'm over 18, it's fairly obvious from my face, but for the younger generation, obviously a bit more challenging. But that flow doesn't really need my full driving license or my full passport. If a service wants to know whether you hold a particular professional status, for example, it doesn't need the full certificate, the full credentials, right? It needs what we need is a fact to be proven, right? And I think the distinction matters because identity data, I've lost track of how many times I've given an image on my driving license, an image of my passport, and then it's out there, right? And it is high risk data, and we all implicitly, or we have to implicitly trust as being managed in the right way, because if you don't, you can't get access to the service. We want access to the service. So, but once you hand over that sort of document, like I say, you're relying on people to manage that appropriately. Delete it and make sure if they get hacked, it's all encrypted and all that stuff. And it feels like that's become the norm. It's become people just expect that now. Is that a good model? I think the answer is no, right? It's a poor default model for us, and we've just normalized this because in the most part, there are people out there doing this as a service now, right? It's just the easiest implementation path. So Vega, I want to say Vega, but anyway, Vega is Microsoft Research's attempt to change that model, and it uses zero knowledge proofs to let someone prove a fact from a government-issued credential. Cool. Without relieving the credential itself. Even more cool. So the credential stays on the device. So I guess whatever that means, whether it's in TPM, I don't think it's in TPM. I don't think they're doing that. But anyway, it means it's local. And then the relying party just gets the proof of the thing that it actually needs to know rather than the underlying document. So I guess they mean the model sees it locally, don't they? And, it's a fairly significant, important shift because it moves identity verification away from document sharing to claim providing, which we're used to that, right? It's 2FA. We do that day in, day out, but it's applying it to this use case. So, as as we start moving to all our glorious agentic AI systems, if we've got agents completing forms on our behalf, interacting with services, they might need to do these sort of things. Having this sort of capability to hand to be able to prove who you are without the item itself, i.e. not blindly trusting an agent with your passport or your driving license data, then I think that's probably a good thing. And it gives the opportunity for us, and we don't often get this right, to re-architect these things. It's not just a cryptography thing. I think it's an architecture thing, and we can actually seriously then ask, how can we redesign the design? How can we redesign identity flows around minimization, which is a good thing. So I think that was really interesting. I'm going to slip my coffee. Any thoughts on
that? Is it relying on
the pain point is real, isn't it? And I think that's the key thing here is that we are having to share, very, would you classify it as PII? I suppose you would classify it as PII, wouldn't you? If you're sharing your passport or driving license or some other photo identity across to different platforms. So that is a concern. So anything that would help with that, I think is a really good thing. But that whole identity piece it's just a minefield, isn't it? I can see that we're going to have issues in the. Do I go politics here? No, actually, we're not going to go politics here. This is a politics-free podcast. We're not doing that. But that how do you prove your identity in a digital world is going to become very key. And there are lots of privacy concerns. There's lots of, I'm trying to think of a polite way of saying it, but, concerns that the government might misuse that information, for example, if it's a government issued ID service. So, anything that we can get to actually reduce some of that requirement to share that type of information is going to be a good thing.
And also, I've seen a debate recently about is it PII or not, the passport, for example, a picture of a passport, a scan of a passport. And we use that for, as you said, David, for hotels, and we had to. You have no choice. Sometimes you want that to access a service, a facility, space. You have to trust. You can't think in that moment. And even though it's not considered really a PII, officially, the scan of a passport, if you see all the things you can do in practical life with someone's passport, you can open a bank account, you can do so many nasty things, you can take a credit, you can damage the credit score. So it's just that is very dangerous. So it's good that I'm going to check Vega. I like you said Vega because that's how we say it in French. But yeah, that's very important that someone or a group like Microsoft do some research that can be even reused or become a standard in the future. And I was thinking blockchain. I don't know why. Like we already do that now with emails proving identity on, for example, LinkedIn, or I think they use like a form of like a Web3 type of trust that you have access to a token that prove that this belongs to David or Richard without necessarily having access to the full page, the passport number, the expiry date, and your size, whatever that is a PII. Anyway, I digress, but very interesting.
Yeah, cool. And it sort of leads me into, I said there weren't any hidden meanings, but it kind of leads me into the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is something called magnetic light, magnetic brain, and a LLM model called Fara 1.5. And the thing here is that Microsoft's research were trying to show that, or trying to prove how far AI could be pushed with the smaller models. Now, we've all heard about co-work, and we've all heard about the open source stuff that we've got in Microsoft now. All that's great. They rely on quite big, expensive models, right? And Microsoft Research tried to look at it the other way and said, right, okay, well, how could we do this with really, really teeny tiny ones? And so Fara 1.5 is the computer use model. And it's fairly simplistic, so it's focused on things like browser-based tasks, and there are a lot of use cases for that sort of thing. Still, right? There are still people just working in the browser, right? For sure. So instead of the current model, which is let's just use a large frontier model for everything because it's easy, right? Throw anything at it and we'll get it done. This design intentionally splits the work between a model that plans and delegates, another one that will handle browser interaction, and then a harness that manages things like context, tool use, long-running tasks, stuff like that. And I think it's super interesting because what is it? The Fara model comes in at something like 4 billion, 9 billion, and 27 billion sizes, right? So you can run a 4 and a 9 on a machine with enough grunt, right? And then, as you said, Richard, I've been testing, a lot with local models. So I've got my own little chatbot on my machine, right? And that chatbot can do computer vision. And that's really, really interesting. So for people who don't know, when you're using your LLMs and you're using your tokens, if you give it an image, and I'm really guilty of this, because I'm working a lot, I'll just take a screenshot or something, give it to the LLM, say, this is the result, right? And it'll go, oh, okay. In the background, it obviously turns it on its text, and right? That burns a huge amount of tokens. A massive amount of tokens. So what I'm doing is interjecting a manual step. So I do that image to text locally, and then I'll just give the LLM. And does it take 2 minutes more? Yes. Am I bothered? No. Right. And that way I'm minimizing the amount, the amount of tokens I'm using. So the same principle would be here. Can we use those things to, and this is the intent of the research, how much can we do that locally versus how much do we have to use the big foundation model? And really interesting, well worth to go and look. But it did take me off on a bit of a tangent. And the tangent was probably, this has been out a while, the initial Fara model. And just before Christmas, I think, looking, as I was digging into this, doing a bit of research for the pod, you can see people, this is amazing. When is it going to be available in Foundry Local, right? Because people want to test it locally. And just before Christmas, there's Microsoft representatives. Yes, it's on roadmap. Don't worry, it's coming. And then earlier this year, no, not coming locally. And there's a bit of a cynic in me that's saying, hang on a minute, if everyone suddenly pivots to local models, what's going to happen to our revenue? And, everyone across the board, right, have suddenly, we spoke about this in the last pod, didn't we, in terms of the cost per token use cost going up, trying to recoup all the money that they've sunk into those investments. there's a cynical bit of me that's saying that there's not the enthusiasm to really push the local model stuff to where it could be. We've clearly this thing, the MagenticLite and magnetic brain, are evidence that it's possible, but equally it's evidence that all of a sudden, if you're doing this stuff locally, there's going to be a cliff edge in terms of revenue. And we've all got these new shiny, Copilot enabled machines. Where in the future, if you're watching build, we've got hoofing great big new machines that have been co-developed with NVIDIA that are capable of running some of the really big models, right? And I don't know. What's your thoughts? Am I being too cynical?
You just touched on the point that I was going to make. So if you look at some of the announcements on Build, you had obviously all those new NVIDIA chip-based piece. And is it still called DevBox? I don't know. But that new sort of AI machine that they announced that was going to be for local processing. Yeah, unless Microsoft are secretly working on some sort of licensing thing around the back of that, then they're going to lose the ACR generation or the license sales for the cloud hosted stuff. Because if you're going to do it locally, unless there is some sort of subscription fee they're going to tag onto the back of it, you're going to lose a lot of your revenue because people are going to be doing it locally. I mean, I'm certainly considering it. The only problem I've got is how do I justify spending $2,500 on a relatively beefy local machine that I can run some of the coding models on. Because I look at what's going on with GitHub Copilot, with the Anthropic coding things. I can't remember what I'm on the Pro plan, but I run out of tokens on that like that. It's so quick to kill the tokens. Yeah. So you have to, I think, at least consider whether you can run these things locally. But then if you do, what's in it for Anthropic? What's in it for Microsoft? What's in it for Google? Unless there's a way that they can benefit from it, either by training their models off the back of what you're doing locally, or by trying to license or generate another revenue stream from you doing it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that is going to be a really interesting tension for the next, couple of years, possibly, about where some of this is going to run. Apple is pushing the fact they're running all their stuff locally on device. Now, whether they actually are or not, because I know they've leveraged a lot of the Google Gemini stuff for their Apple Intelligence. And they've been a bit cagey, apparently, about where that actually, where the sort of dividing line or the line is around that. But you're going to have that pushback and that concern. And I think we're seeing it, already in the market, that the token cost is becoming a problem for organizations. But anyway, Cyrus, what about you? What do you think?
No, I think too much. I didn't actually expect you to bring me here. So it's a very dangerous line because we are in between politics and digression. So it's a bad mix. But no, they should completely change. I think that's a long time we think that. And I know, David, when we worked together somewhere, I think you will remember, we had this problem with Microsoft on the ACR, that some stuff are ACR and some stuff that are run locally still generate indirectly new deals for Microsoft, could not count as ACR. So the concept of, the digression is, what's the conflict of interest here? How cloud platform can push for what's good for the clients if it's against their own interest, and we know for a fact that the future will be like local for the AI. At least we talk about hybrid cloud a lot, but for the AI, I have a strong opinion, and I can be wrong, that it will be more local. That's why when I see your project, David, I'm really interested on. There's a lot to talk about. So I will stop here, but there's probably a whole episode we can do about what could be a good business model that is win-win for both innovation cloud platforms and unlimited consumption of like local resource, like it was before, like with the first graphic cards.
Yeah. So something to revisit once those shiny new devices land and we can see the direction that they're going to take, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
Excellent. Thank you, David. So moving on to my topics. Now, I really hate it when I see something written down without actually hearing someone pronounce it. So I'm probably going to butcher the name of the thing that I'm going to talk about next. But yesterday, so the 25th of June, so we record this on a Friday, the Linux Foundation announced something called Akrites or Akrites. But the reason it caught my eye is not the announcement itself, but it's the signatory list. So we've got Amazon, Anthropic, Google, IBM, Microsoft, etc., etc. The core of it, as I understand, is that Akrites is a coordinated effort to find, fix, and responsibly disclose vulnerabilities in critical open source software. The thing it is built around is one shared confidential place to coordinate discovery and remediation with a dedicated incident response team that works upstream with the actual maintainers. So rather than the situation we have now, which is, I don't know, a dozen or so companies independently scanning the same library and each filing their own reports, we get something slightly different. And the argument they're making, and I think it's probably the right one, is that AI has changed the maths on this. So finding a serious vulnerability in a major open source project used to take an expert weeks. It now probably takes a machine minutes, and often the models come back with several all at once. So the rate of discovery has gone up, but the number of people available to patch has not changed. In fact, it possibly might have actually even decreased. So the letter has a line in it about measuring success in patch deployment and not publication, which I thought was an interesting way of positioning it, because the moment you publish a fix, you've also in effect handed the attacker or attackers a map to that very vulnerability that you've just disclosed.
Yeah.
So I want to be a bit careful here, because there is a version of this that is just a press release with lots of logos on it, and we've all seen plenty of those. But what makes me think this is more than that is the specific problem that it is trying to solve, which is the maintainer of the open source code being buried under a load of noise. So I'm sure we've all looked at how much the world runs on a handful of open source libraries maintained by, in some instances, just a handful of people. So the idea that AI has just multiplied the inbound load on those people by a large factor is a little worrying. So one of the signatory quotes in there is from a company called Endor Labs, who claims that of the thousands of validated open source vulnerabilities surfaced in a few months, fewer than 5% have actually been patched. Now, I can't independently verify that number, so take that figure as theirs rather than mine, but it does sort of point at the problem. There's also a clause in there about maintainer of last resort, which is that when a critical package has nobody actively maintaining it, Akrites can step in so a fix will still ship. Now, that is the bit I would keep an eye on, because it's also the bit with the most potential to go wrong. The line between standing in for an absent maintainer and quietly taking over a project is not always a clean one. And the open source world has long memories about that type of thing. Now, we should all declare an interest, which is that IBM is one of the signatories, and I'm not going to pretend to be neutral about my own employer being on the list. What I will say about that, though, is that the quote that's in that release or letter is that this needs an ecosystem approach, because the risk has grown too large for just one organization. And to be honest with you, it's probably the same that I would have said without having the IBM name or even the Microsoft name, to be fair, attached to that letter. So we'll just see how that comes out of this. And I will move on to the other topic that I mentioned at the start, which is related to that, because Anthropic was mentioned. And that brings me on to Fable. So for those who watched the last pod, Cyrus actually opened the show on Fable 5, Anthropic's new model. And I then pontificated about how IBM, we had the GitHub and who had the GitHub Copilot licenses, that you also had the action to use Fable. And I encouraged people to use it before they changed the pricing model. Now, we recorded that on the morning of the 12th. So again, Friday morning, 2 weeks ago. And when we published on the Monday, as everybody knows. Now, later on that day, so by the time that we'd all probably switched off our laptops and gone to sleep, Fable had actually been switched off worldwide for every customer by a US government export control directive. So the whole segment that we did on that pod aged badly in just 72 hours or 2 and a bit days. So I'm not going to redo the whole piece here because I wrote a blog post about it. You can go and have a look at that. But the short version of this is that about a year or so ago, I wrote a blog post asking whether the future of cloud is sovereign. And we've discussed this several times in the pod. And at the time, I answered that entirely as a question about data. So where it lives, who can reach it, which laws apply. Fable showed me there's a second axis that I completely missed, which is whether the capability you depend on keeps running at all, and who, other than your vendor, i.e. Anthropic, Microsoft, or whatever, can switch it off. So the shutdown disclosed no data, crossed no residency boundary, it just removed a model. Now, every data sovereignty control I've ever written about or we've been involved in would have done nothing to stop that. The bit that I think that matters for us as architects and consultants and technical people is that the obvious fix of keeping a backup model from another vendor does not necessarily work because Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, all sit under the same export jurisdiction. So holding two of them is a bit like holding two bonds from the same issuer and call it diversification. And even holding the weights yourself does not fully solve it because the off switch was never really the model. It is the control plane underneath the model, or even the control plane where you access it. So I'm still working through this, and I think Azure Local Disconnected may play a role here. But as I said, I'm still sort of trying to figure out the full implications of that. But it's an interesting scenario I think a lot of organizations found themselves in last week with this. And as I said before on this one, I think that Anthropic probably did the right thing because when you've got an export control issue, you can't realistically decide, okay, that user's going to access it and that user's going to access it. The safest thing is just say, right, nobody accesses it. But that just leaves a whole can of worms out there around actually what do you do within that scenario. So I don't know, David, Cyrus, do you have any thoughts on our amazingly interesting timing about the Fable stuff from last time?
I think it's. I've never seen. Is this a first, right? In terms of export controls being used in that way,
that I'm aware of, yes.
a software product from working, which we know that Microsoft, you look at what they've been doing to NVIDIA in terms of the hardware export controls, right? But yeah, and it makes you wonder: are we, as a world, needing to relook at how those sort of things work, right? Because blocking, it's a bit like saying Office 365 is a risk now, right? And that's the context, right? And the same thing could happen, right? Microsoft could just turn it off everywhere, other than perhaps the ones that are. But it's the software, right? It's not the running where the software is running; it's the software itself. So even if you've got like your dedicated regions in Germany or wherever they are, right? If that cord is pulled, could realistically Microsoft or any of the other vendors keep those instances running? And I think it's a really, really dangerous precedent. And I'm kind of interested to see where it goes.
It is, and I think this is going to push that whole. I mean, Cyrus will know this better than any of us. That what France is doing at the moment by actually just saying, look, we're going to go with local providers, open source, local service providers, and we're not going to do anything with Microsoft and Google and the big companies. And David, you know this as well. But I mean, I've worked with a number of organisations that have to worry about export control. So DFARS, ITAR regulations, etc. And this is a problem for in there. But and again, the way they handled it is basically the way that Anthropic said, right, you're going abroad, you can't touch that data anymore. So we're going to just cut you off. Quite a lot of them would give them burner laptops if they travelled outside of the country that just didn't have anything on those laptops. So Anthropic did the right thing, but you can't build something now, especially in a regulated industry, potentially, that is reliant on something that can be switched off without really any of your controls. And some of the local models, as you said, actually have to call back home every so often. So even a local model might not get you around that because it might give you, 30 days before it has to call back home. But as soon as it calls back home, that model will go as well, potentially.
The scary part is we are light years away from the Americans for development of like the AI. And I've seen a few days ago how OpenAI just lose money because what they want to do is to reach AGI as fast as they can. So they don't really make profit. They generate billions, but they spend the double. I'm not the double, but almost. So yeah, this is also a big topic, and things that used to be crazy before, or you were called paranoiac. Now every week there is a reason to give rights to these people. Where for you mentioned the French, I said no, they exaggerate. They're a bit radical when they say we will all go to Linux. But now, even myself, I checked if I can play video games on Linux. If the day will come, I have to transition to Linux or local, or if there's no more internet. It's these kind of things that sound crazy, sounds less and less crazy, especially the context of the world.
Yeah, I don't know. I use the word interesting a lot, but I think that is because that would have ruffled a lot of feathers. I mean, concentration risk is a phrase that comes up in regulated industries all the time around where your workloads are. Is that going to add an extra flavor to that as well? I don't know. We'll see. So on to something a little bit more, less doom and gloom anyway. So Microsoft has announced a new accreditation, which is the Frontier Transformation Engineer badge. Now, what this is in effect a bundling up of several certs with a load of sort of skilling and other sort of learning activities that you would need to do. So in total, Microsoft reckons it's about 86, somewhere between 80 and 90 hours worth of study. And this is focused on the new sort of foundational AI elements that Microsoft has. So Agent 365, Foundry, Copilot, Copilot Studio, GitHub Copilot, etc. So it is sort of aimed at partners more than probably individuals, but I think it's not a bad thing for individuals that are in that space to have a look at and consider whether it's something they want to take part on. So as I said, the first bit around that is the certs. So there's the new AI Engineer Associate plus the GitHub Copilot certification, and then the new Agent AI Business Solutions Architect, AB100 or whatever that number is. So those three establish, in theory, the technical baseline. So yes, you can do this and you are knowledgeable. Then there's the project ready phase, which is about building and integrating agents with governance, security, compliance, in theory, scenarios that map to real delivery. And then finally, there's an advanced readiness phase, which covers governance at scale, which Microsoft is calling hypervelocity engineering, or HVE. And we'll probably cover that off, I think, in one of the next pods coming up. So I think that's actually a really interesting model, framework, process, whatever you want to call it. So that was sort of bubbling up around sort of April, May time, but not all the training was available for the latter bit. So I think the certs were there, but not necessarily all the training. So my understanding is that training is now all available on Skilling Hub, which is skilling-hub.com. So go and have a look at that. And it's probably worth a good sort of view around that, especially if you're in the AI world within the Microsoft stack. Now, I think it's time that we have a little bit of security. So Cyrus, over to you.
Thank you. I'm not sure if it will be as interesting as those sovereign cloud subjects, but I will try to make it so. So I just shortlisted some updates that could be linked to security somehow. There's only one for Intune. It's manage home screen on Android enterprise device. Intune can now silence apps when manage home screen asks the user to authenticate. For example, during sign-in or when you put the PIN. That means apps cannot launch activities, show notifications, appear in recent apps, trigger pop-ups, dialogues, toast, whatever you name it. It's completely in a locked state. For normal laptops, this sounds like boring. It's small and it is useless. But for frontline, kiosk, shared device especially, warehouse, healthcare, retail, factory flows, etc., this is a serious control. A kiosk device, to remind, is only secure if the lock experience really stays locked. Many bypass lives in small user interface gap, and this update close the gap. And Entra and conditional access. So probably you've seen it, and I was really surprised and excited that there's sorry, I'm talking about something else. Yeah, let me just talk about this one. So there's been a discussion about Entra Connect supporting FIDO2 passkeys during setup. Have you heard about this one? So for until now, we could not use FIDO2 passkeys for Entra Connect, which is we know that the Entra Connect is the old Azure Active Directory Connect. I forgot the name. Sync. I mean, you know what I'm talking about when you synchronize. Yeah, exactly. Exactly, this one, David. When you synchronize your on-prem Active Directory to the cloud with different settings, federated or whatever you choose. And when you connect that one, you needed to be global admin, and you could not use the passkey, which is completely entering in the cognitive dissonance state when you say, forget the password and use passkey only. So now you can technically use passkey, right? But actually, after digging a bit, Microsoft, that version introduced that capability that was released and then recalled by Microsoft. So we can't rely on that version. And for now, there's no confirmed stable release version of that. So it's going to happen, but something happened and I could not understand what yet. But this version is not effective from what I understood. A quick one for also something I discussed before in conditional access. Microsoft is retiring the conditional access grant control, require approved client app. And so there's a new date now. I talked about this one twice already in the past. There was October 2025, March 2026. And now the date is June 30th. So maybe when this episode will be released, you can no longer create new policies using a require approved client app, which says the app is approved. The existing policies continue to work for a few moments, but they are deprecated. The replacement is require app protection policies. And this is the one you should use with you can check more controls on the data on the device. You can burn you can wipe the data on the device remotely if the user is not working anymore or is compromised, etc. Defender. So this one I thought of you, David, especially for what you discussed just now. I wanted to discuss that one 2 weeks ago, but now I've seen that it's actually working really well. There's an update that is called Local AI Agent Discovery and Runtime Protection on Windows endpoints. That's a mouthful. And it's now in public preview, and it's actually doing well. So Defender can discover supported local AI agents on onboarded Windows device. That includes coding agents, ID extensions, desktop assistants, local runtimes, and agent platform. So that's why I thought of you. And as we know, AI agents are becoming the new asset class. They can read files, they can call tools, they can generate codes. If you hear us talking about agents and you don't know what it is, so this is basically in a nutshell what they do. They can act with the user's context. That's the big difference. So now we can see which agents are running on which endpoint, doing what action, and with which data. The runtime protection part is even more interesting. Defender can inspect the agent loop. So by that I mean the user prompts, the tool calls, tool responses, and risky agent activity can be blocked before execution. So you don't have to talk about AI is risky. It's more like a granular, like a real user actually. The second one I thought of you, David, but maybe you knew that already. There's a Defender update on it's threat intelligence inside entity pages. So now you can see directly from the Defender portal when you are doing your activities on controlling what's this incident and what. You can see on the entity page IP addresses, domain, URL, and file. They now include threat intelligence in Purview. So you have, for example, reputation, attribution, infrastructure relationships, and sandbox context directly inside the investigation workflow. So that will avoid the users to jump between portals. And you had to do that until now. I've seen different MVP or people trying to create custom pages, but now it's all integrated. Now the one I was surprised you mentioned the name, Richard. So you know what I'm talking about, the RoguePlanet. So that one is a bit scary. There's a new Microsoft Defender 0-day that has been reported publicly as a. I have the note here. CV 2026 5656. So if you check that number, it's actually very scary. So the reported issue affects the Microsoft malware protection engine, which is all the Defender in a nutshell, and could allow local elevation to system on fully patched Windows 10 and Windows 11 systems. And the scary part is that the proof of concept is public. You can access it, you can read it. And Microsoft has said it is working on an update. So as you can see, even security products can be part of your attack surface. So I highly suggest that you track any Microsoft advisory, validate Defender engine, and any kind of platform update health. Check all the time and update as soon as you can. And that's linking nicely to actually the subject I want to talk about since a few times, and I keep forgetting, is Commando VM. So a Commando VM in a nutshell is a Mandiant, so I think it's Google, open source Windows offensive distribution for penetration testing and red teaming. Think of it as Windows native offensive lab, especially useful for Active Directory and Microsoft heavy environment. So we know Kali Linux for Linux type of environment is more open source tools, etc. But any kind of type of Commando, type of similar environment for Windows is very expensive. And from what I understood, Commando VM, it's you can use it for free, or you have some paid version. I haven't checked those to be honest, but it's the demo I've seen and the use case I've seen is very interesting, especially also it's not only for red teams, it's also for blue teams. Because if you cooperate into Windows native toolings, your defenders, etc., for example, you can see, you can try to exploit, for example, the 0-day that is active now, without having to breach your contract with Microsoft because you use a real. That's what I used to do before, to use a real ISO and real code, product code. It's a bit nasty. Now you can use it directly and play and learn. One news on the Sentinel quickly. I would highlight it as a behavior-based results linked to incidents in advanced hunting. This one is now in preview. You can use the behavior info table and link it to new existing incidents. But before you could not do that. Now you can directly work with behavior, and that's very important because that will massively reduce the amount of false positive. You can directly see, like, okay, there's a million incidents. You can tag then or inject the behavior info table directly and see where the user was really connecting from, etc. And what is linked to that is also now on Purview. Is the last type of news. The first one is endpoint DLP device attributes are now easier to query at scale from advanced hunting in the Defender portal. Teams can use the device info table and the DLP info column to understand device configuration and policy sync states. And that matters because DLP depends on the endpoint health. So DLP policy has value only when the device is onboarded. So that's something I used to talk about, but now it's something you can directly check. And the second, it's again, endpoint DLP now supports device scoping. So you talk about burner device, Richard, and that's the type of now you can have burner device directly from Purview. Before you needed to rely on specific tools. I've thought of Thales. They do that often when they travel to different countries. They have their own in-house, very powerful tool to receive an alert and destroy the device remotely. But now you can scope a DLP policy to specific device groups. For example, finance users on Windows device can receive a stronger policy, while the same users, not different users, the same users on macOS follow a different policy. So it's not about scoping different users and department. We are talking about the same users with different devices. You can have a burner device, and they will have different strict policies compared to the local device on-prem. And that one is, I wanted to finish with that one because, and I'm happy to talk about burner device. That one is approaching Microsoft to more the powerful tool used by companies for different use cases for single users. It was not possible before. It was very superficial. And yeah, that's it for me.
Super interesting.
Thank you.
I completely missed all of that, Cyrus. So thank you.
Yeah, there's so many news now, interesting news happening.
No comment. Thank you very much, Cyrus, as always. I think that just about wraps it up for us. I'd be remiss if I didn't do the whole sort of obligatory. If you liked the content from here, please do drop us a like, subscribe to the channel, click whatever notification option you have on the platform of your choice. It really does help us to understand what works, what doesn't work, etc., etc. But for now, all that leaves me to say is thank you very much for joining us this week, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time, assuming we haven't all melted from the heat wave that we're having in the UK. Which does mean if anybody's hearing the background noise, I've got like 4 fans in this office going on, so apologies if that has been going on in the background the whole of the pod. But anyway, we will see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Richard.